Hello, I want to introduce you to a new project for Catholic Man UK and Ireland, which I'm going to call Catholic MANifesto. It is what it says on the tin, pretty much like Catholic Man UK and Ireland. Catholic MANifesto is simply going to be a statement of our beliefs about masculinity according to the Catholic faith. And we will be using these opportunities to speak with other men, predominantly, about what it means to be a man, to be masculine, to be a Catholic man, to be made in the image and likeness of God the Father, and to promote fatherhood and authentic masculinity to those in our care, if we're fathers, to our families, and if we're priests, to our parishes, and if we're neither, then simply as a fatherly man to anyone in need of good fathering. So today I've been speaking to a group of Catholic men, Catholic businessmen, who will introduce themselves, and then we will go into what it is that we're going to be talking about in this particular session. I hope you enjoy. Catholic MANifesto.
Hello, I'm James Leatherland.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Cooper.
I'm Sam Baker. So to look at what we're going to be talking about in the next little while or so, we need to first kind of establish what we know. Masculinity is in crisis, and that's even acknowledged by the secular world. And we'll have a look at some of the facts and figures that the media puts out. And then we'll look at from a Catholic perspective. You know, we know that the absence of fathers, the absence of good masculinity in society there's a demonic influence behind it. Then we'll look at it's not difficult to be a man. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The signs are there, even literally within our own bodies. And then we'll look further at what we could do, what Catholic Man UK is doing. How can we address what appears to be this crisis of masculinity? Let's take this phrase, masculinity is in crisis. What's that mean? What's that mean to us? What's that mean to the world out there? What's that mean to Catholics? What does it mean to you personally?
I think the first thing that springs to mind is that we basically living in a fatherless society. Although the biological part is being done, families are broken. Families are missing the dad, that guiding hand, which is obviously a problem for any one family. It's a problem for the children. It's a problem for the spouse, and mostly it affects the children, but it affects everybody. And I think what we'll be going on to talk about is that in a fatherless society, it is hard to get people to know God the Father.
Well, it breaks down into society in general, even, doesn't it? It causes problems in society. Something that we've seen time and time again. And as well as that, you end up with families where there's no paternal figure, and they might have lots of different men coming in, and that's statistically a source of abuse for the children as well. So as society breaks down in this way, it's kind of a real symptom of a massive problem.
So I can see this when I was in teaching. I remember one occasion early on in my career, we were dealing with one young lad who had behavioural difficulties and so on and so forth, but I think he was also about to be put into care. And we met as a team of professionals, so there were teachers and social workers and the like. And I remember counting about 15 professional adults around the table talking about this one young lad. And I thought, even then, what's missing here is his dad. There were 15 of us paid professionals stepping in to do literally what his dad should have done, which was to take that young lad to task and give him a decent, stable, ordered family life. And it just boggled the mind. As a young teacher, I thought, this is what I'm going into. And the 18 years that I was in education, it was so much at the forefront. You knew that you were at the chalk face, as we used to say, but just hardly able to hold back the tide of family dysfunction. That the kids who came into school were dysfunctional, and it made the school dysfunctional. It just boggled the mind.
probably the person that's been married perhaps the least long out of the four of us. I kind of went into marriage thinking, okay, isn't it wonderful? You know, my wife and I will share the washing, we'll share the laundry, and all this kind of stuff. And it's only over the last year or so where, perhaps in conversation with my wife, it's come to the point of going, well, it's actually my task to, you know, set the boundaries of the family, set, you know, what is it that Felicity wants to do? What is it that I need to do? And oddly, that equality that I somehow imagined in a modern marriage, like, actually translated into chaos, because I wasn't an absent father, but there was no real clear, there was an absence of clear fatherhood, in as much as the kids didn't know who daddy was, and was it daddy doing the laundry tonight, or so coming at it from that angle, even in so-called functioning relationships where both parents are present, there is that absence of fatherhood, because people think, oh, we should be modern and progressive, which is all well and good, but we had to go through arguments and kind of assessing where are we as a couple, to go, okay, daddy's in charge, daddy makes the rules, Felicity looks after the household, and, you know, goes, I need whatever, a budget of so-and-so for shopping, I need a budget of this for that. And the kids have kind of calmed down within that. They now have that framework. Whereas previously I was thinking, oh, what should I have been doing? Where should I be helping more?
I think that's something that perhaps we can come back to as we sort of start unpicking this. But I think one of the things that is part of this crisis is that we just don't have the framework, the scaffolding, the examples of good masculinity. Even us who might think we've grown up in good, sound families when our dads have been around. I think just so much has been lost over the last couple of generations of simply how men act. And how men carry out their lives. We've had nothing to look at and watch and absorb and take on board. But that might be something that we can sort of unpick. Just go back, I think, to Mark's point right at the beginning about the way the society is. Just to mention the recent Telegraph article that there's a bit of hand-wringing, a lot of hand-wringing, even in secular society. Some of the facts, and you might want to comment on these things, that 72% of murder victims are men killed by other men. This is the Telegraph picking these points out. 74% of deaths by suicide are men. Suicide is the biggest killer of men in Britain under the age of 50. Boys are behind girls at school and less likely to go to university. I think that's something that we know quite well and have known for some time. Middle-aged men, gents, this is us, are less happy, more anxious, less satisfied than women the same age. Less likely to have friends, more lonely than women. It's boys from lower income families that are struggling. Let's have a look. What else they say? Well, yeah, I mean, it's good that they point out things like online pornography with its extreme and often degrading depictions of sex is teaching a generation of boys to think about relationships in a dangerous and exploitative way. The problem of dating apps, and then they talk about the surfeit of young historically, societies with a surfeit of young single men are more volatile and violent than those with a better balance delivered by marriage and monogamy. I thought that was interesting to pick out. So there's a whole number of things that even a secular commentator is looking at that suggests that masculinity is in crisis. Anything that we want to unpick from that?
Well, I thought it was really interesting about the women have more friends thing. And that, that's really interesting. And it is something that we observe. I think that certainly something I've observed, as you tend to fall away from your friendship groups when you get married, and your wife obviously maintains those relationships. And so you just sort of, you meet the husbands and you end up being sort of friends with them. So you might have a bunch of friends, but they're kind of peripheral friends, not the friends that you might necessarily choose. They might not have the same interests but it doesn't mean you don't get on with them really well, but it means that those friendships are somehow shallower, aren't they? And my oldest son has just recently got married, and you can see the same. It's really interesting to see that same thing happening with him, where he's, just hasn't got time for his own friends because his wife is such a planner. She's making so many plans, and so he ends up sort of being friends with the people that she wants to be friends with, which is really, it's really interesting. And
so what do you think's happened then? Is it because we're not in situations where anymore where friendships sort of automatically, organically evolve? We're not in clubs, teams, we're not in pubs, we're not in groups of tradesmen. Is that the underlying problem?
It is the pub, Sam, isn't it? The pub is a big part of it. I mean, even when I was when I first started, we'd all go down a pub after work, for a couple of, just even if it was for a couple of pints. And that has definitely, all of that has changed. But also, I'm a member of the Catenian Association. I don't know if any of the rest of you are, but they're like, it's just sadly calcifying, and there's fewer and fewer of us every year, and the sort of demographics getting older and older. And there just doesn't seem to be. It's often discussed in Catenian circles, why can't we get members? But it just, boys, I don't know. And I often wonder if that's a church thing, that we haven't got as many men going to mass as we once did. But it's very, and what's interesting is the Catholic man thing proves that there is a hunger among Catholic men for community. So it's very interesting.
It's one of the things we've heard most often doing the men's work that we do, is that the guys come to us and say, I'm so glad you're there. I really wanted to connect out with other Catholic men, but there's been none in my parish, or none even in my deanery. It's great that there's at least a form of community, and that's something that we need to be working to put back across every parish. Just coming back to something you said quite early on, Sam, about where we've got to with the fathering situation. You said about a couple of generations we've lost what it is to be a father. So obviously we had the World War II generation, which obviously went out and fought for their country, did obviously very masculine things. And I think after that, there was obviously then a lot of the dads were gone. There was also a big backlash against the war and the privations of war, which led into the 60s, where it was all just, we want to get rid of marriage and monogamy and responsibility, which has led us down this path now where marriage is actually a rare thing rather than a normal thing. So that brings us to a point where, even as men, we haven't necessarily learnt to be fathers, and particularly wider us. I mean, if we're lucky enough to have been raised by mother and father, well, that's great. We've got some idea. But even those dads that we had didn't necessarily have good fathering. So it's actually generations of lost ability to be good fathers that we need to pick out, undo, and rectify. Does that hit home with anybody else?
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking with my father-in-law yesterday, actually, and one of my wife's sisters have found a photo of him when he was about 5 years old, with his two very much older brothers who were born before the war, and then his father came back after the war, and then he was born. But he would say himself that his upbringing then as this much younger child, this much younger sibling, and a father who came back from the war with, well, I mean, wounds of all sorts, but he then became a very sort of reticent, quiet man. And my father-in-law would say that his own upbringing then as a young man was very lost and lacking in guidance. His father seemed very distant. And then I would say that the impact on his daughters, he's got 3 daughters, he doesn't have a son, has been one of perhaps a certain estrangement as well. He's not learned, or hadn't learned, I would say, how to be a father, because he lacked some of that fathering from his own. And it was interesting, only yesterday we were sort of kind of talking through that, just around the edges. And I think he realizes as he gets a little bit older that perhaps he's not quite had something there in his life that he could have usefully done with.
What is it you think we're all looking for as sons or daughters from our fathers? And it's, I mean, just a few reassurances that you're on the right path can do it. But it's that knowing someone's got your back and is just looking to sort of show you the way, but without forcing you down the path. That constant rock and guide. And yet, you know, it's a daily thing, as well as, you know, for marking the milestones of life. And it would seem that the stories that I've heard from people where dad was missing or dad wasn't really present or whatever, the absence is very much felt. Like my father wasn't there for me, or it never felt like my father was there for me. The assurance of love definitely missing, but also it's just that little bit of, yeah, you're doing all right, son. It's a good way to go, or indeed to chastise you when you're getting it wrong, which, you know, it doesn't seem like a complicated recipe.
What James was saying is really important, and I think making space for conversation is probably the most vital thing. So you're not just an authority figure, or you're not just, you know, someone who's in the periphery, in the background, but that you are engaging as a father with your children, that you're giving them space to ask you questions, and that gives you time then to talk through issues that they're, you know, that they're experiencing, their experiences, and it helps to form them, and that's how they feel that you've got their back and that they can come to you, and it stops a lot of problems forming later on, I think.
It's actually it's a difficult balance to get as a father when you are trying to sort of guide them. And obviously, we try and give them discipline, but in order to do that, discipline, as a priest once expounded to us, is about giving them structure, not stricture. So it's not just trying to browbeat them when, you know, when they've been bad or whatever, but trying to get them to understand that there is a standard or a principle that serves them good purpose. And therefore, something I found as a father that's been fascinating as a Catholic dad is you realize that the church has got disciplines, practices, and structures precisely to help me, you know, what, you know, a wandering son, if I'm not careful, to stay within the family of the church.
And it perhaps sort of also then, that comment that your priest had made to you leads into very much, there are differences between men and women, and, you know, obviously we're not there always just wagging your finger, but just me saying something in a calm, slightly deeper voice to my kids may well have a very, you know, quite a profound impact, as opposed to Felicity going, "Can you please put your toys away? Can you please put your toys away?" You know, I'll just say, put your toys away. And that is perhaps is something that you know, maybe we can open up a little bit more, that it contributes to, certainly I find it contributes to having discussions with secular men, like, well, why am I doing this? What, you know, how am I being a good father? Well, actually, just by your being and being a man and saying things in the way that you say it, with your deep voice, and maybe you don't have a, you know, maybe you shave, maybe you don't shave, like, you are distinct as a father, and you are okay like that, and that's okay, and that's good.
Yeah, and I think let's pick up on that a bit later on down the line, because I think we do want to come to the point of going, how do we know that we are a man and that we do manly things, and those things are important, and a lot of that sits within the body physically, our physiology, who we are, and I think we'll come back to that point and expound on that. So hold there. I just want to, before we sort of move on to look at the more Catholic perspective, just sort of wrap up on a couple of points that James made, and I think all three of you made, really. This absence of fatherhood, the void that leaves, the gap that it leaves. Certainly, we might have experienced that for ourselves, but many young men are experiencing that out in the world. That does leave a vacuum for other things and other people to come in and fill that gap. And we've seen people like Andrew Tate, and the Telegraph article I mentioned earlier picked up on Andrew Tate, because, and again, I think it's the point that Mark and James are making, that, and Alex, what you're sort of saying about your girls, is that we gravitate towards masculine attributes. We feel we need them for that structure and that discipline and that order and that room to flourish. And if we're not performing that as good, mature adult males, someone else will perform it for us, like Andrew Tate or whatever else there is, gangs. You know, some of the stuff that we've seen in London recently of sort of just youths running feral and just, you know, burning cars and stabbing people and the like. You know, that's the vacuum that's being left. And that's where the secular world wrings its hands and sobs its tears and doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what the solution is, and perhaps doesn't even know what the cause is. And I think this is what I want to come on to next, really. We know, as Catholic men, that at the root of this is the destruction of the family. Society goes by way of the family, and family goes by way of the father. So if you destroy the father, then you've destroyed the family and you've destroyed society. And why is it that the father is to be destroyed? Because the father works essentially as the face of God the Father, who his children cannot see. We're meant to be icons of God the Father. I'll just read you something here before we sort of dig into this a little bit more. Because when I read this, when I came across this, I was firstly shocked, and secondly thought, okay, yeah, there's something determined about this. And this was the sister of the American feminist Kate Millett. So Mallory Millett is her sister, not a feminist, but she recounts this story. Kate Millett was a leading figure in the feminist movement in the 1960s and had a burning objective to destroy the family, as she deemed it a patriarchal institution devoted to the oppression and enslavement of women and children. So her sister Mallory gives an account of a typical chanting ritual. We can see where this is kind of all coming from, that would take place among Kate and the other activists around a long oval table in New York City, starting with the question, why are we here today? To make revolution, they answered. What kind of revolution? She replied. The cultural revolution, they chanted. And how do we make the cultural revolution? She demanded. By destroying the American family, they answered. How do we destroy the family? She came back. By destroying the American patriarch, they cried exuberantly. And how do we destroy the American patriarch? She replied. By taking away his power. How do we do that? By destroying monogamy, they shouted. And how can we destroy monogamy? By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, and homosexuality, they resounded. So it kind of, you know, there is a determined and consolidated effort to destroy the family through the father. And so, you know, as we have to take perspective as Catholic men, we know that a fatherless society is a faithless society. We know that there is a destructive satanic influence behind all of this. And human fathering, as we understand as Catholics, has its key purpose in leading the family of God back to the Heavenly Father. So I think this is something that we need to really pull apart and make clear. That is our purpose as Catholic fathers.
I think it's very interesting as well. We're saying that the absence of the father causes a vacuum, and obviously all the various things that go in to fill that vacuum, whether it's gang culture or going from serial monogamy just to try and make your way as a man in a sort of warped or twisted way. But that absence that is left sounds very similar to what like Sir Fulton Sheen would say: when you try and eliminate God from your life, you're going to try and replace him with something else. So we've actually got to deal with these two sort of very similar confluent problems. You know, if we've removed God, there's a vacuum. If we remove the Father, there's a vacuum. And small wonder in such a great vacuum that society's collapsing around us.
See the link, especially with promiscuity, isn't it? That, you know, if you've got a promiscuous society, so they've infantilized men, and Hollywood and in film and, you know, on the telly. So men don't. There's no responsibility linked to any kind of relationship. And what the men turn into, you know, you see it if you're an employer, especially I think in that sort of generation, that a lot of the kids that come in, their only experience really is playing video games and masturbating, and they've got they can't relate to women or anything in any other way than as a sexual object. You've got serial, like you say, serial monogamy, I suppose, or just men who just go and sleep with lots of women. And then you've got women with lots of children by different fathers, and they grow up, and then because there's no father figure, they're brought into the gang culture. And I mean, this not, you don't need to be a Catholic to see it, that it's all around us in society. And like the secular media are picking up on it now and saying, like, pointing out exactly what we're talking about here, which when you start to connect all the dots, it's quite extraordinary, really, isn't it?
The father was there to to establish the structure and support the children and give them rules, etc. Well, governments are supposed to do that as well. They're supposed to lead the nation, and I think a lot of the paternal attributes are applicable to that. And over hundreds of years, governments had established some of those rules, but then with technological advances in prophylactics and things like that, there's then been a weakening of those rules, and the structures that the governance had, which relied on the family, were picked at or broken at and decided that, oh no, we don't like this thing. Divorce and remarriage, etc., has then weakened at the core of society, and subsequently then all of the structures are coming tumbling down.
Sorry, just to pick up on your point about technology, I think that's something that has rather emasculated men as well and left us quite lost as to what we should be doing. It divorces us from our physicality, it divorces us from nature, it makes life very easy, and it makes us very comfortable beings. And I think technology wraps us around with cotton wool, and we think that's a real life. It's a kind of matrix thing, isn't it? And I know a lot of people use this analogy, but we are cocooned by technology, and that drains us of that real visceral physicality of who we are and what our bodies can do as men. I don't want to digress too much down that route. I just wanted to pick up on the point about technology, because I feel that the two key things, the feminist movement that was set out to really pull masculinity apart, and technology, are two things that have attacked men. And just as a last point on that, Satan is using, I would say, women through feminism, as he did Eve in the Garden of Eden, as the weakest link, and we as men have sat by and watched as Adam did. But as a result of the fall in the Garden of Eden, God said to Adam, his salvific punishment was, you shall work by the sweat of your brow. Well, we now look for every conceivable piece of technology not to work by the sweat of our brows. And we're denying that salvific punishment to ourselves. And we are doing, as men, as much damage to us as anybody else is doing, because we're not picking up on the punishment that we were given, and we're not guarding our women against the wiles of Satan, just as Adam did right at the start in the garden. It's the same sin. The sins of the fathers being passed on to their sons, and we have to be very, very careful that we as Catholic men are watchful against that. Anyway, it was a slight digression, but I felt I needed to pick up on your point about technology.
But it's valuable because, that abrogation and all that sitting on the sidelines and not taking responsibility for, salvation, it trickles into society, because then if you don't want to work, and you don't want to, you're looking for easy way outs. The easy way out, over as far as I can see, over the last decade, has been to refer to the government. It is bizarre that there's a conservative government putting more kind of big government legislation in place than any other conservative government in the past, and yet, like, are we happier? I don't know. Psalm 146 speaks about don't look to print, don't place your trust in princes. It's the Lord that's going to solve everything. Quite clearly, we're looking for the government to solve the COVID crisis, looking for the government to solve the cost of living crisis. Actually, a lot of that probably, James, you and I were speaking the other week about how, we're cutting corners and getting our kids to do bits and pieces. The church talks about trying to do things on the lowest possible or the smallest possible level that makes things successful and work. Just watching a documentary on the Mormons before starting this conversation tonight. And again, it's the smaller communities where there is a strong father figure and there's the kind of an organized society. They're not looking towards the government, whoever the government is, to solve their problems. And maybe that's the void that, again, the men need to step into.
You break up the family, you hand over the responsibility to the government, and then you just become a government number and a cog in the wheel. Yeah.
And as we've removed God, like religion, from our lives as well, you see this increasingly, that people are going to the doctor to ask for moral and spiritual advice, or they're looking for the government to legislate about what's moral, gay marriage, for example, or, any number of, like, abortion, or any number of things that you could. And it's really interesting that idea, exactly as you're saying about, that we might call it the nanny state, but that increasingly people are, without fathers, we're deferring to the state to make those sort of key decisions.
As
I've never thought about the COVID thing.
Father, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really interesting.
Just go for it.
Yeah, well, go on, you finish off, because I might have been changing the tack slightly, so just finish off.
Oh, it was just a little anecdote from my kids' school where they were we were looking at sort of part of the PHSE curriculum, and a lot of it you go like, that really is stuff that certainly a father or mother and at home would be discussing. And we asked the headmistress, and she was just straight up honest about it. She goes, even in the school catchment area and the type of kids that go there, on average, they're quite affluent and well off, but we still have to have this curriculum to fill in for a lot of the things that are missing at home, and to fill in for what the parents might not be giving, either because they're working or because of whatever patchwork family that might be in place.
I remember in teaching is that schools were the interface, really, between the kid and society. You became more than just a teacher. You were a surrogate parent. You were a behavior management specialist. You were a doctor or nurse. You were a therapist, a counselor. And schools more and more had to fill those gaps.
And I think the other thing that goes with this is that the more that all these micro decisions are then being passed on to the state, moral decisions, and even sort of developmental child decisions, the government can only deliver those on a general basis, and then they legislate. So then we have rules or laws that try to fix a problem that they can't fix, but also those rules then actually try to get in the way of parenting or being a father. So certainly now that rules like you can't take your children out of school for more than 3 days at a time without this or whatever. Well, I can understand there's a good reason for that, but from my point of view, I am the children's father, so that rule I appreciate why it's there. My children have a very high attendance rate, but I know what's in the best interest of my children. And if I can see that there is something that we should be going to, that should be on my authority. But if you enter in the school system, that's denied to you. So that's why so many Catholic families do that, etc., to try and get away so that mother and father can deliver education. But for lots of other people, that is a real problem. And even then, the government, again, with this generalizing lawmaking trope that they're going to have to go with, they then say, well, actually, we're worried that if people are homeschooling, they might not be getting it right. So we're now going to put the law down on those. And I think that is something that parenting and fatherhood is going to have to be facing, and particularly in the UK over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and you talk about it being in the best interest of your children that you as a father make decisions. Well, state education really homogenizes what is given to our children so that every child receives the same kind of input, regardless of their abilities, interests, social, family backgrounds. You'll then, again, this goes back to the government just laying over this whole sense of morals and values that everyone must have, because that's what we say so. And the excuse, I say it's an excuse, the way it was put was, well, if we aren't doing this as schools, as educators, then those children aren't getting X, Y, and Z. And that was an argument for sex education. If we aren't telling kids how to contracept, no one is, and then we're going to get loads of unwanted pregnancies and loads of dysfunctional families. And so you can see that as a kind of that they kind of claim a bit of a moral high ground, they being whoever is influencing the education system. But no, it really takes away from seeing your child as an individual, as a created being with their own needs and their own ways of having to be responded to. And only a father and a mother can do it to that degree.
But the rhetoric is constantly degrading the idea of the primacy of the family in terms of like the parents are the first educators of the children. And you hear it all the time. I mean, I listen to Radio 4 during the day, and it's constant narrative that, parents are failing, that more abuse takes. I mean, these are, as the family breaks down, we see that more abuse takes place in the home, and, we see increasingly toxic environment. And that just serves to feed the narrative. And as you say, no one can see the disconnect, that there's an easy way to fix it, which is to go back to having proper families.
Yeah.
But then, so, society needs the father, we're saying as well, but it's good morally formed men. And where do we get those from?
Yeah,
that's difficult in the secular context because, like Mark said earlier, we're all infantilized. We're all idiots. How can we possibly be trusted to have families and kids?
But the answer is simple, and it is, I mean, if you can say, well, what makes a good man? Let's say, regardless of the fact that there's no infrastructure for good masculinity at the moment, it is simply learn skills, get a job, find a wife, have children, and pass on your knowledge and wisdom to the next generation. And that's
make your bed,
as well as
Jordan
spiritual.
Peterson would say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a very, very simple answer. And that was passed on from one generation to the next until the point at which we got to of, I think, self-interest. I don't want to carry out that responsibility or take on those duties. I want fun, I want freedom. And I think that came with the sexual revolution. And this is at the bottom of it all, that good manhood is responsible manhood. Fulton Sheen talks about suffering and responsibility being the mark of manhood. Boyhood is self-satisfaction, self-fulfillment, self-interest, whatever it might be. And the more that one's turned in on the self, the less, sorry, try that one again. The more one's turned in on oneself, the less one is able to grow and to flourish, because you grow and flourish by rubbing up against responsibility and the people that you are responsible for. So it's a very simple solution, but a very, very difficult one for people to get a handle on, because they don't want to give up their lives, their easy lives, or the lives that they feel that they want.
It is that it's whom do you serve, isn't it? And if you, as you're saying, if you serve yourself, it's a recipe for disaster. And we know the right recipe is to serve God and God alone in yourself, in your families, etc. So yeah, serviam, non-serviam, we're right there. We
in Catholic Man UK in Ireland have the motto, as very secular, esse, action follows being. We're serving a creator who has created us for a specific purpose. And it's we're morally obliged to fulfill that purpose. It's written into our DNA. And if somehow we turn away from that purpose, we're twisting our nature. No wonder we're sick, unhappy, mentally ill, lonely, because it's written in what we should be doing as men, created by God, as evident in our bodies and our generative desires. And we turn away from that, and we make ourselves unhappy and unfulfilled. It's like forcing a tree to grow upside down. That's not its nature. And no wonder we are struggling as men, because we've divorced ourselves.
I feel better just having this conversation, boys. I have to say. Can I just ask, Sam? Are you aware? Or you probably are, but how, like, the intellectual, like how that connects together? The Cartesian sort of idea of like that motto is a Thomist motto, isn't it? And that is the opposite of the sort of post-Enlightenment Cartesian turning towards self, so that we're reaping the whirlwind of relativism in our society today. So I don't want to get too intellectual, but that's basically what we're talking about, isn't it? Is exactly that thing that it's interesting to trace the philosophical roots, so that you get to the point where you see that what came out of the Enlightenment, the thing was that all I can know is myself. And that that we've taken it to ad absurdum almost now with transgenderism, where your created reality is irrelevant, and it's just whatever you feel like is your reality. So there's no objective truth, everything is relative. And where Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, summed up there, St. Thomas would say, I am, therefore I think. Action follows being.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And it's so. When you think about it, it seems so. You're tearing yourself from your very nature by choosing to do things at the opposite to what you've been made to do. And if I've done a talk along these lines to sort of a group of young adults, I've taken a very simple example of a coffee cup. We can see it's been created to fulfill a purpose, to have liquid in it, and handle, and it's made to be easy to drink from, and so on and so forth. And if that doesn't function, the handle falls off or the bottom falls out, we throw it away, because our natural inclination is there's something wrong with that article, let's get rid of it. And yet we don't sort of take that line with ourselves as men. There's something wrong, I'm not doing something right here, I'm not doing what I'm meant for, let's deal with it. Paradoxically, there has to be a certain level of self-knowledge, not obsessively, not just thinking I am the only way of understanding the world, but knowing oneself as a created being is really, really core. And then knowing oneself as a man and what it means to act and live and move and work as a man. And we've talked a lot, James, haven't we, about the virtues, and I think this is the conclusion that as you think about these things, you have to come to, that being a good man is being a virtuous man, and it's the active pursuit of the virtues that make me into a man. We're not reinventing the wheels. We said right at the beginning, it's all the tools are out there. You just need to orientate yourself towards them and grab hold of them.
Sorry, that's the re-establishment of the call to holiness, isn't it? Which we're missing from the church at the moment. It's like the opposite thing. You've got the churches saying, no, you don't have to change. You can just be exactly as you are, and we love you. God loves you as you are. But that's not biblical. That's not tradition. That's not what the church teaches. The church teaches us to conform ourselves to Christ.
And as dear Father Pius has encouraged us all to do, and what we've tried to encourage all the men to do as well, to try and stay on that path of virtue, is the daily examination of conscience, which I've found to be the most brilliant tool for actually disciplining myself and focusing, okay, where am I at as a man, as a dad, as a husband, as a son of God, and looking at how I'm fulfilling those roles on a daily basis through that examination of conscience. It's so powerful. And I think the more men realize that, the more men do that, I think, that does help. But that's the call to holiness, like you're saying, Mark, that there's not a lot of priests telling us to do that. That's the concern. And yeah, and one of the reasons I think that we're having to do men's ministries and even having this conversation is we are trying to take up where ministering to men has been denigrated, fallen short, absent for, well, certainly for the last 25 years or so. The men have just not been looked after, and now we're having to really come back and look after ourselves.
This afternoon, well, today was, I mean, not on too much of a tangent. This afternoon, it went back to back work wise. There's lots of little bits and pieces coming together, and involved in a case at the moment where some witness statements had to be prepared, etc., and got in on time, and then invoicing, etc. I just remember sitting around about 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon, just going, I wish my dad could help me. And I was going in the same breath, going, you idiot. Like, he doesn't know anything about what you're doing. He doesn't know the intricacies of your accounting software or whatever, your emails, etc. This is on you. And no matter how hard it is, like, and I don't know if you guys have moments where you just want to get out of your head. You just want to go, absolutely not. I don't want to be here. Just get me out. But it was in that moment that I was like, right, no, actually, right, okay. Open up the next email, type that email, send, do the invoice, do it. Round about 4:30, everything had settled because that whatever fuss in my head had settled down. We just got through the stuff that only I could do. And I'd come to the conclusion that is what being a man is about. Like, these are clearly problems that have been put on my plate. I'm to solve them. And in a way, that is salvific.
That's that thing Churchill said, success is not final, failure isn't fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. And sometimes that's what makes you a man. It's not being brilliant or anything like that. It's about being the one in the, who's prepared to just go, right, we shoulder the burden and we keep moving forward. And sometimes that's all you need to do, that even though it's difficult.
I think sometimes something you said there, Alex, about wanting your father to be there to help you along. My father died in September, and I've had various thoughts like that. Wish Dad was here. Dad would know what to do, whatever. But I always find that is a point where you realize that's a call to prayer, because you do have a father with whom you can spend time.
Yeah, and it does bring us back, doesn't it, to what we said earlier about the need to be a representative of God the Father to our own children and to everybody out there. There is also a need for us to become close to the Father so that we understand who he is, and he can channel his grace better through us because we understand him more closely, and then we can better represent him to others. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about prayer. And if we didn't talk about prayer, not just as a kind of, duty or motion that we have to go through somehow to make ourselves good or better or worthy of salvation. But we are opening up that conversation with our Father, and the closer we get to him in prayer, the more we reflect him. But throughout the day, we simply need to be going to our Father and telling him the difficulties, the problems in our lives, receiving graces from him, telling him of the joys in our lives, telling him of the next thing we might even be doing in our lives. I think we do need to start looking upon God the Father as the perfect Father, the one that we perhaps have not had in real human terms, and start considering how our relationship with him ought to be different and filial and childlike. Otherwise, I think we are in danger of just sort of talking about these things in theory and then just getting on with our busy lives and hoping somehow that he'll keep an eye on us.
And that's really what builds faith in the church, more widely, is the devotion that we have as families at home. And what better way to be a parent than to pray with your kids at home and to show them the beauty and truth of our faith.
Amen.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think we're doing something. We're just doing something by getting together and having these conversations and sharing them. And we want to reach out to the Catholic dads, to, you know, the Catholic men out there, and say, come and be part of our community. You know, come and join in. And, you know, we want to celebrate fatherhood. We want to celebrate our faith, and we want to have good conversations, do manly things.
I think the other thing that we should be saying at this point, obviously we've talked a lot, we're all dads, but not all Catholic men are dads, but all Catholic men have fatherhood innately within them, whether they are biological fathers or not. And I think one of the things that society has done to us over the years is made us all, whether we are self-serving or not, quite insular. And the gifts that come with masculinity, that sort of the ability to see a need and to meet a need and to look out for people, to care about them and to try and guide them, is something that all Catholic men should do for all of God's children. So although we've been talking specifically about what we do in our own households, etc., that does translate every man to everyone that they come across, which is effectively is love thy neighbor, isn't it? But it's in that masculine form. So everything we've been saying this evening isn't just, you know, husband, wife, and children. It is actual, authentic Catholic masculinity for all men. The other thing that we quite often talk about with some of the talks and things that we do is there'll be a lot of men who are Catholic, want to be Catholic, who feel that maybe they're not fulfilling their masculinity, and that what I wouldn't want anyone listening to this conversation to go away is feel that they're worthless because they're not succeeding. We are all on a spectrum from somewhere, from fallen sinner trying to come home, that prodigal son moment, but we are all on a trajectory, hopefully, to sainthood. That's to holiness, which is what we've been talking about. And if you're in pain, if you're a suffering man who feels worthless, know that that's the devil that's trying to keep you down, and that's not what Christ wants for you. And as other Catholic men, we're here to try and pull you along. We're here to try and help you to get those graces from Holy Mother Church to help you on your path to heaven. If you are more where we're at, and you feel really on fire and you want to help other Catholic men, we're saying, yeah, do that daily examination of conscience, live your life as in a virtuous way as possible, but also help your brothers out there. We need to work together to try and get these things done. We can't all do it alone. And then if we're even more on fire than that, every time we do anything, people ask us to do more, and we'll take any help doing that as well, and you can be part of the conversation.
Set the seed to start a men's group around adoration. You know, I think it's come out in the conversation that time with our Father in heaven is being crucial. And Sam and I, you know, we've both experienced the power of weekly adoration with intent. You know, loiter before the Lord with intent, because stuff shifts. And my God, you know, if more men set up groups like that across the country, no doubt we would see shifts. So yeah, if you feel inclined, start a local parish and start it. You know, don't put it on the parish priest. You know, just do it.
To sum up, and the recent talk that Catholic Man UK did at Brompton Oratory to a group of young men and women on masculinity showed that there is enormous thirst out there for this kind of conversation, this kind of information. You know, well over 100 people turned up for that, and the place was packed. And I think we do have a duty to be more visible and to be preaching the good news and to be taking all of this out to people. So I hope that what we're doing here is a start. That
I think if you can just run us through the Commission of Adam, because you mentioned the core bits of masculinity, and I think that's where the Catholic Man UK bit, if you could frame them in the Commission of Adam. You go.
Yeah, so what we talk about a lot is the 4 or 6, depending how we're talking about it, P's of manhood. There's primacy of the father. There's procreation. There's provision and protection, and these were 4 tasks given by God to man, to Adam in the Garden of Eden, to have dominance over creation, to multiply, and to till the land and to keep it, i.e., protect and secure it. And to that, we add prayers we talked about, and we add pilgrimage, because we are, having been cast out of the Garden of Eden, we are on our pilgrimage back, and we're meant to be leading those close to us on pilgrimage back to the heavenly kingdom. So we talk about primacy, so leadership, procreation, provision, protection. And in fact, procreation is the reason why we need the others, because we have to, as men, lead, guide, support, set up, decide, meet challenges, and so on, in order to provide and protect the stable environment of the family for this new life. That is to make its way back on pilgrimage to God. And so these are very core. These are central points to what we say in Catholic Man UK and Ireland as the tenets of manhood. And I suppose just to kind of wrap that up, young men need to be working on this right from as soon as they can. They need to be pursuing excellence in the virtues to support those tasks that they've been given, and that's through education, acquisition of skills, building physical strength, financial prudence, gentlemanly behaviour, and for Catholic men, understanding the faith, the sanctity of the sacraments, the need for salvation, passing on to the next generation, and this is what we are tonight endeavouring to do.
Good job, man.
Catholic Manifesto.